I tested the best photo cameras, and I realized the best photo cameras all have 3 things in common, and understanding this is the key to finding a good camera. So in this video, we're gonna look at the best cameras for photography and the 3 things that you need to look out for when choosing your perfect camera. If you're looking for a compact photo camera that can also deliver professional level results without making any sacrifices, we have the Canon M50. It has a 24 megapixel APS-C sensor, which is pretty standard for this kind of camera. It gives you a lot of resolution for cropping into your photos and also for printing. With 14-bit RAW, you can easily edit these photos to produce professional results. Plus, the colors right out of camera with the Canon M50 are gorgeous. If you're a casual user who doesn't really like to edit their photos, you're going to get stunning photos right in camera. The Canon M50 also shoots 10 frames per second, which is great for catching fast-moving action, and the autofocus is definitely fast enough to keep up. It also has intelligent object, face, and eye tracking, so you'll never really miss your shot. So, who is the Canon M50 really for? Well, it has the 3 things we're looking for: a great sensor, fast shooting speed, and small and compact design. But there is one problem. The Canon M50 itself has a ton of horsepower in the camera, but the main defining factor for the M50 is the size and body. It's super small and compact. It's about the size of a can of Coke, and it's not a hassle to take around with you at all, even if you don't have it in a bag or a pocket. And it also has a built-in flash, so you can always get your shot. If you're a casual user who wants an everyday carry camera, this is a great choice. And if you're someone who's just passionate about photography, this is a great budget option. However, one problem with the Canon M50 is that the lenses available for it aren't that great. They're really meant for casual users, and if you're someone who's a true enthusiast and you really want high-end lenses for your camera, you really don't have anything available. You can adapt the Canon L series lenses to this camera, but once you add the adapter and the lens, this camera becomes a lot bigger and it's just not compact anymore. Also, this video is not sponsored by any of the camera brands we talk about today. It is, however, supported by you guys, so I'm gonna leave links in the description down below for all the cameras we talk about today. A lot of you guys might be looking for a camera that can deliver stunning photos, stay small and compact, and have really good lenses that are professional grade available for that camera. So let's talk about the Nikon Z50 and its more affordable little brother, the Nikon Z30. In terms of sensor, it has a 20 megapixel APS-C size sensor. That is a bit lower than other cameras on the market. However, that lower megapixel count is actually a hidden advantage. The lower megapixel count leads to bigger pixels on the sensor, which allow them to gather more light per pixel, which leads to better image quality and better low light performance. And because Nikon doesn't use an optical low pass filter to soften the image, you actually get a lot more detail than a typical 20 megapixel sensor. So the number one thing, the sensor alone, is worth getting this camera for. The Z50 and the Z30 are a dream for people who like to edit their photos. Because of the Nikon 14-bit RAW format, it has a really impressive amount of dynamic range and color information, and you can really create professional high-level edits with this camera. And it shoots at a really healthy 11 frames per second, which is fast enough for any kind of fast-moving action, and the autofocus also is fast enough to keep up with it. Plus, they both have touch autofocus, so you can simply tap something and snap it into focus. Photographers really care about the design of their camera. Both the Z50 and the Z30 have a really nice deep grip with phenomenal button layout. It really feels like you're using a proper DSLR and not a small mirrorless. Both cameras have 2 command dials for shutter and aperture, and the button layout is really easy to navigate. Shooting with both of these cameras allows you to really slow down and really focus on what you're creating. But you might be wondering what the difference between the Z50 and the Z30 are. The Z50 has an optical viewfinder and a tilt screen, and it's really made for photographers. The Z30 is pretty much the same camera, but it's actually made for vloggers and casual shooters, so it doesn't have an optical viewfinder, it doesn't have a built-in flash, but instead it has a side articulating screen. And even though it's a vlogging camera, I think if you're someone that doesn't need an optical viewfinder and you're not too much of a purist, you can save about $150 by getting the Z30 instead. But both cameras deliver the exact same pro-level image quality that any photographer would love to use. The one thing that will probably hold a lot of people back from getting the Z50 or Z30 is that the sensor really isn't high resolution enough. Personally, 20 megapixels is plenty, but there's a lot of people that prefer 30 or 45 megapixels in their camera, especially if you heavily edit or crop your images. So if you want to retain the elegant design a beautiful photography camera, but you still want that epic horsepower that only comes with a serious pro camera, we have to check out the next camera on this list, and that is the Fuji X-T5. The Fuji X-T5 is a really special camera because, dare I say, it's probably the best crop sensor camera to come out in the last 5 years. And it has the 3 things that we look for in a good camera. The first thing you'll notice is the 40 megapixel X-Trans sensor. That is currently the highest resolution sensor in a crop camera. The Fuji X-T5 sensor has a really unique pixel structure which eliminates all loss of detail and information. It actually gives you the same level of detail, dynamic range, and color information that you would normally get from a full frame camera for half the price in an APS-C body. And the shooting speed in the Fuji X-T5 is ridiculous. It does 10 frames per second in mechanical shutter mode and 20 frames per second in electronic shutter mode. This is ridiculous. This is on par with a $5,000 mirrorless camera like the Canon R5 or the Nikon Z9. And of course the Fuji X-T5 has 14-bit RAW for heavy editing. But what makes Fuji cameras really unique are actually the in-camera colors. Fuji cameras come with 16 built-in film emulation profiles made to emulate the look of film from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. It absolutely transforms your photos, and you get this really unique look to your photos in camera without any editing. And Fuji carries this philosophy over to the design side of the Fuji X-T5 as well. It's really made to look like a vintage camera from back in the day, and it gives you a really slow photography experience, but it still has all the bells and whistles of a modern camera with command dials and modern button layouts. So it feels and looks like a vintage camera, but it can still operate and perform like a modern camera. Also, Fuji cameras are often made from titanium or aluminum, and they're really pretty to look at. And the Fuji X-T5 sits in this really unique sweet spot where the X-T5 is a professional camera that gets used for professional photography for billboards, but it's also a camera that someone who just loves photography as an enthusiast can also afford. And because of the film emulations, you're going to produce the kind of photos you've always wanted to make. The only thing that's really missing from the X-T5, or really every camera on this list, is the fact that they're not full-frame sensors. Full-frame sensors are bigger than your traditional crop sensor cameras, and thus they collect more light, and the more light you have, the better your photos will look. But they also give you a wider field of view, which gives you almost a movie-like quality to all of your photos. Everything just seems to pop out from the frame. And even a bad full-frame camera is going to look better than most cameras by default. The full-frame camera that I recommend to most professionals and even casual users that are just getting started is the Sony A7C. The A7C produces amazing results, but most people tend to overlook this camera because they don't really understand why the A7C is such a great deal. It's at a pretty affordable price point that is much cheaper than most full-frame cameras, and in terms of the horsepower, it has a full-frame 24 megapixel sensor, which again is plenty of resolution for cropping and editing. But there's 2 things that set the A7C apart. A lot of times when you're just starting out, you don't have access to big lights, and editing actually plays a huge role in making great photos. The A7C is incredible at high ISO, and it has really great dynamic range. And thanks to the 14-bit RAW, you can really push your images when it comes to the editing. And you can take small lights but create photos that look like a professional photo shoot. And you can easily shoot images at high ISO, such as 10K ISO, without any issues. And the A7C shoots blazing fast photos at 10 frames per second, making it great for anything with fast moving action. Plus, the A7C also has phenomenal Sony autofocus, which basically never misses. It's easily 10 out of 10. And with all of that combined, the A7C is a really powerful camera. But the thing that most people miss about the A7C and Sony cameras in general is the lens ecosystem. You get a wider selection of lenses, more affordable lenses, and this allows you to slowly build up your lens collection over time, whether it's for professional work or just for your personal use. And design-wise, the A7C is flawless. It's exactly what you want in a pro mirrorless camera. Solid build quality, great ergonomics, but nothing particularly out of the ordinary. The only issue a lot of you guys might have with the A7C is the fact that it's still a 24 megapixel sensor, which is enough resolution for most people, but it might not be enough for some enthusiasts and professional that want something that's at least 30 or 45 megapixels. The A7 IV is very similar to the A7C, but it's a 33 megapixel sensor. However, that resolution comes at a cost of $700, which is pretty steep. Something cheaper is the Nikon Z5. Or if that's still not enough, there's also the Canon 5D Mark IV, which is one of Canon's best cameras to ever come out. But because it's much older, it sells for a lot less than the original price. You can usually get it for $1,300 to $1,500 used, or a little bit more at retail. It's a 30 megapixel sensor with a shooting speed of 7 frames per second, and it's one of the best cameras out there. But because it's an older professional camera, you can also get older professional lenses for it that are usually less than half the price that they originally sold for. But overall, if you want a good photo camera, remember these 3 things: a good sensor, high resolution, fast shooting speed if you're shooting fast moving action. If you're not, you can go with something a bit slower like 5 or 7 frames per second. And most importantly, keep the design in mind. If you're someone that wants a camera every single day with you, take everywhere with you, keep a small camera like the Canon M50, but if you're okay with bigger size because you're more serious about your photography, look into a full frame camera because you will get much better image quality. And if you guys want to check out any of the cameras we talked about today, make sure to check out the links in the description down below for the best pricing and the most up-to-date pricing. Peace.